Now you think rates will be higher for longer than they were before, which is good for your filter or good for the environment of the stocks that you want to buy. And so what do you look for? What is the process of identifying a stock?
Well, we really think about it in the sense of there's sort of two questions. What sort of businesses do you want to own and how much do you pay for them? Because, of course, we don't think of ourselves as buying stocks, right? We think of ourselves as buying the business. And when we think about what kind of businesses we want to own businesses that have these qualities of durability, of resiliency, of sustainable competitive advantage, of decent returns on equity that we think are sustainable over long periods of time. We're not so worried about if they're lumpy. We're worried about whether they're durable. And so that, to us, has always been a core part of what we do, but it's even more important when you're in this disconnected world that we're in today. And what I mean by disconnected is there are two sort of themes happening at the same time in the economy and the market. And one is this huge transition from free money to money having a cost, this technological disruption, which is roiling through, this transition in the magical thinking that no matter how much money the government prints, it doesn't matter. If you're the currency standard of the world, that somehow you can lower taxes and spend more indefinitely, carry deficits indefinitely. This is all magical thinking, right? Sooner or later, it catches up to you. So there's this big transition happening on the one hand. And at the other hand, there's this enormous complacency. Markets just go up. There's a New Yorker cartoon that said, astronomers find a meteor that's about to destroy the Earth this morning, but in the afternoon, the Fed cut rates and markets rallied. It's that sort of complacency that is means that you have a very segmented market and a very high valued market on average. And for us, the stock picking challenge is to navigate between those, to identify those businesses that are durable and resilient and at the same time undervalued.
And historically, that's led you to bank stocks, for instance. I'm wondering if you still like those. I understand that you like PNC and US Bank Corp more than the others. Wonder if that's the case. And then also wanted to ask you about Meta, which is a stock that you bought when it was sort of down and out.
Actually, our largest bank holding is Capital One, which I think about as the original fintech company. My grandfather had an expression for a well-run financial, as he called it, a growth stock in disguise. It's only been in financials for essentially that whole period, and yet it's outperformed the S&P 500. And that's not because financials outperform the S&P. In fact, the financials index underperformed the S&P, but it's because within that vast sector, there are these growth companies in disguise. So Capital One's our largest, Wells Fargo, and yes, we continue to like them because they have the characteristic of durability, and yet they're valued as if they're fragile, because all of us remember the financial crisis. And in a funny way, that happened after the great crash in the 30s, the bank runs. You got all the way into the 50s, and the view of banks changed from they're fragile to they're boring. And once they were viewed as boring, they traded at 15 times earnings. So I think we're in the front of what could be a long change in perception, where banks go from being perceived as very risky to being perceived as safe but boring, like utilities. Utilities trade at 20 times earnings, banks trade at 10 or 12. Banks have twice the capital that they had before the financial crisis. We've rolled through COVID. We've rolled through the interest rate shocks. They are beginning to show their durability. They make up a real bulk in our portfolio. They're probably our largest sector holding. There's a lot of diversity within that, not just banks, insurance companies, and so on. But think of them as growth stocks in disguise or undervalued, durable franchises.
And then Meta, you bought it when it was down. Do you still own it? Do you still like it at these levels?
We've been trimming Meta all the way up. But, the thing to think about, this is why, it's sort of crazy. Meta, just 2 years ago, had a market cap that was less than Home Depot. They had 2.5 billion customers, users. And the number of users was still growing in every one of their services. And the engagement of their users was still growing. So number of users growing and the amount of time per day, per month that those users spent in Facebook, in Instagram, and in WhatsApp. That was not the perception. The perception was TikTok is killing them. Facebook is dying. TikTok's killing Instagram. And, having studied the company from the day it came out, this is part of our investment discipline. We studied Costco for 15 years before we owned a share, but one day the stock closed at 42 and it opened at 26, and we bought 15 million shares or something in a single day. But we were waiting for an opportunity to buy this beautiful business at a value price. That's what was served up in Meta. And the data was clear that those users were growing, but the perception was so disconnected.
I want to shift gears, Chris, and ask you about Berkshire Hathaway. You're a longtime admirer, investor, and you're on the board. So a lot of ground to cover here, but I want to ask you first about Berkshire Hathaway board meetings. And I know these are private meetings, but what can you tell us about being on the Berkshire Hathaway board? What are the meetings like? Do they serve coffee and cookies? How many times do you meet? What's it like inside the room?
As a director, I just don't think I can comment. Beyond this single statement that I've been going to Berkshire Hathaway meetings since 1989, and I've read every annual report and every 10K over all those years. And the one thing that I would say is that the inside is the same as the outside. And, Gandhi said, happiness is when what you do, what you say, and what you think are all the same. That is a profound representation of the culture of Berkshire. And everything that has happened since I went into the tent was exactly what was there from the outside. It was a translucent tent, and and the integrity of that organization, that leadership, the stewardship culture, the fortress mindset, the sense of being responsible for the life savings of individuals, that is absolutely permeated. And Warren's culture, not paying directors,
you're not paid for your trouble.
Well, we're paid $800. Let's not get carried away here. And so we're not insane.
Pretty close to it.
No, the stewardship culture is really the essential value system of Berkshire Hathaway, and a big part of the board and is just being watchdogs, vigilant, promoting, nurturing, doing anything we can not to interfere with that culture and to promote it.
I know you were a big fan, a very big fan of Charlie Munger, the late Charlie Mungers, and I want to ask you, what does the company lose with him not being there, and what's it like for the company? And as an investor, I'm not going to ask you as a director anymore. What should investors think of about Berkshire without Charlie Munger there anymore?
Well, I'll broaden your question so that I can talk about it more and say, what does the world lose? And, the world loses one of the great teachers. Charlie said that we have a moral duty to try to get smarter every day. And at his heart, Charlie was one of the most profoundly dedicated teachers I've ever known. And I just can't recommend enough to everybody. Just read Charlie's talks. He was dedicated to talking to students. Those speeches have been gathered over time. They are thoughtful, eloquent, and there's not a single person in any profession whose life would not go better from trying to internalize some of his teachings. And his role model, of course, was Ben Franklin. And you think about Ben Franklin, who was in many ways one of the greatest businessmen of his era. Ben Franklin's autobiography is only about 90 pages, and I would say 80 of those pages are about how to set up and manage a business. They're about the habits, they're about borrowing money, they're about creating partnerships. It's a very useful book. There's nothing in there about the Constitutional Convention. There's nothing. Here was the greatest inventor, the greatest philanthropist, one of the greatest authors, and he just wrote this very useful book about how to help people succeed and how to improve their own personal habits. Well, that was Charlie's mentor, and that's why I say it's, business for Franklin was a means of being able to be free of day-to-day work so that he could pursue and share wisdom. And I would say that was Charlie's life too. So his financial freedom allowed him to continue to pursue this vast range of interests, and then to share that wisdom across all disciplines.
And final question, Chris. Should Berkshire Hathaway investors continue to be sanguine about the company and the company's prospects, given that Warren is 94 years old and, the future is uncertain in that sense?
Who was the third CEO of Standard Oil?
It was not John D. Rockefeller III. There was after the second. I don't know.
I don't know
It
either.
turned over to a non-family member.
Or who was
Okay.
the fourth? I don't know. Standard Oil was the most valuable company in the world for 12 decades. And how did that happen? Well, John D. built an extraordinary collection of assets that had very long lives for producing cash, unbelievably durable assets. He built the company to withstand all sorts of turmoil, Great Depression, world wars, inflation, so on. And he built a peculiar culture, a culture that rejected Wall Street, rejected short-termism. The compensation of the CEO, executive compensation for the leadership at Exxon vests 10 years after retirement. Now that is a culture. And certainly that is a mindset that I bring when I think about the question that you asked. And